Welcome to Etiquette University. As Nicole said, my name is Mike Danaher. I'm a project director here at Etiquette. I've been with Etiquette about 6.5 years or so. I started as an apprentice with very, very little software knowledge. So my background is actually in communications and economics. That's what my degree is in undergrad. And so I tend to kind of go towards these relationship skills. And so I put together this presentation with the help of many, many different people and wanted to share it with you all today. So the idea behind this presentation is to focus on a couple of these foundational communication skills, right? So we're going to start with listening, what it means to listen well, work on building trust. How do you build trust, especially as a new team member, but at any point when you're in a new relationship with somebody. And then we'll talk a little bit about reviewing code and giving feedback. A lot of the examples here are around a software development team, but I think they're pretty applicable to any team that you should find yourself in. And the final piece here is communication tools. What are some of the tools we can use to do that? I'll say that this is a it's sort of like the foundation behind communication. So you can take this and grow it to the next levels of your communication skills. So that would be persuasion and negotiation, and how do you effectively lead a group of people. And so those are not going to be covered here today. These are sort of the baseline foundational skills. And so we want to talk about them. People rarely talk about them, but they say that they're important. And so that's why we kind of put this presentation together. Great. So let's start with listening techniques. What's the difference between active and passive listening? So kind of take a moment to think about that and think about how you approach perhaps a conversation or a presentation like this one as an active participant or as a passive participant. And we don't necessarily mean active as you're talking, right? It's active as how are you ingesting the information. So passive would be you're not reacting. It's very one way. You're kind of sitting back and just sort of accepting the information as it comes in. Whereas active would be, sitting forward in your seat, perhaps asking some questions, thinking to yourself, do you really understand what's being said? And can you paraphrase that to prove it? It's not multitasking. It's perhaps nodding if we were in person and making eye contact. And some people find that taking notes can actually help that because they're focusing on writing things down, and so they're listening a little bit more intently. Now, in the world that we live in, with remote work being sort of the default today, there's some other things you can do with your technology, right? So turn on your camera and show people that you're paying attention to the screen. Make the video screen full screen. Take notes with a pen and paper so that you're not flipping between apps on the laptop. And wearing headphones to really kind of focus in and not be distracted. So think about the impression that you're making when you're listening to somebody else, right? And what does your body language say? And especially when you're starting on a new project, it's possible that there's so much new context and so many new things that you just can't keep up. right? And you don't want to interrupt and ask a question every 5 seconds to say, what does that mean? What is that word? What is this acronym? And so it'll be important to take notes and follow up, maybe find somebody that you can, that's happy to give you 10-15 minutes after every meeting and kind of debrief you on what the context is, right? And that just shows that you're interested. It shows that you're wanting to be part of the team, and that'll go a long way to proving that you're there for the right reasons. I came across this speaker, Jennifer Garvey-Berger, on a podcast, and she brings up some really interesting points about why we listen. And so I'm going to try to play this clip. I can't promise that it's going to come through, but hopefully you can hear what she has to say, because she can say it much better than I can.
So one of the most important things for leaders to do in complexity is learn to listen, and learn to listen in a way that's not the same as the way we listen when we're listening for things that are kind of more in the predictable world. The first and most common way leaders listen to each other is they listen to win. And that's like when you're in a meeting with somebody and they've got a point and you're listening to their point and you're thinking, that is not a good idea. And so you kind of listen to them in order to collect data that you can use against them. And you do your listening in order to kind of cut their problem or their solution out so that you can win. So let's say a colleague walks into your office and says, you know what, I think we have a real problem. I think we're going to miss the deadline for the product launch. You might say, no, we are totally fine. It always looks like this, and then we always pull it off in the end. And so you don't even need to worry about it. And you see how that kind of sweeps the problem away, and you've just kind of won because the person leaves, but you don't have that much more information. The second most common form of listening we do to each other is listening to fix. That's when somebody comes to you and you listen to them and you're already starting to diagnose what's the problem here. And as you listen, you're thinking, okay, is it like this or is it like this? Oh, if it's like this, oh, I've seen one of these before. And you kind of listen in order to drive to a particular solution that's already in your head, and then you offer that solution. You could say, okay, so have you done this and have you done that? What have you been looking at? Let me look at the data that you're looking at. Let me see what you're trying to see. And you could be like right in there trying to solve the thing. Both of those ways of listening, though, you can probably hear are more useful in the predictable world when there are right answers and there are knowable problems that you might have the solution to. In the complex, unpredictable world, you don't know what the solution is, and very often you don't know quite what the problem is. And there, the thing to do is to listen to learn. So in those cases, what you want is to have your perspective and hold it, but also reach into the other person's perspective, to take this long walk, to be able to understand their perspective and your perspective, not to narrow and close and win, but to open and expand and increase the number of possibilities. And from that bigger space, then you've got just many more places where you can build experiments to nudge the system in a better direction. To listen to learn, when your colleague says that, you might say, wow, so you're really worried that we're going to miss this product launch? Can you tell me more about what's going on for you? And under those circumstances, you might hear, it's not in the data, it might be a feeling your colleague has, or it might be that there's some tension, or it might just be like this weird thing that came up for your colleague after having a conversation at lunch with somebody that's not really quantifiable, but it might be one of those weak signals that we need to pay attention to in complexity to help you figure out, okay, let me be sure that I really understand this situation before I just narrow and solve.
What I really like about Jennifer Garvey-Berger and her work is she talks about complexity theory and living in a world where there's so many unknowns. We don't know what's going to happen. We can't predict it. and how can we set ourselves up to be successful every time, right? And so oftentimes I find myself, I'm a fixer, right? Ignacio said he's a winner, right? So I'm a fixer. I'm the type of person that hears somebody and I want to solve their problem. And oftentimes I forget to actually listen to what they're saying, and I've already gone down the path of problem solving, right? And so what I really like about this is it kind of, it gives you that opportunity to be intentional, right? And you can do this before you even go into a meeting, right? You can say, okay, I'm going into this meeting and I want to learn as much as I possibly can from everybody else. And that's how I'm going to approach this. And so how are you going to do that? How are you going to go into your next planning meeting, or your next demo, or your next interface with the business team or the client, and really listen to what they're saying, and trying to really understand, because oftentimes you might find new and novel solutions to their problems, rather than just, take the face value and go from there. So that was listening. I want to move on to building trust. So it's really important when you're, especially first joining a team, but when you're part of a team, that everybody on the team trusts you, and they can come to you, and they can, everybody is open and honest, and they can be a little bit vulnerable, right? They're able to work together to solve all the problems, right? And one of the ways that we recommend all teams kind of operate is to start with sort of a norms document, right? So norms develop on a team organically, right? They'll just evolve over time. Do people bring their own lunch, or do they all go out to lunch? Do they work on site, or do they work remotely? Today it's probably remote, right? But does everyone take lunch at the same time? Does everybody log in to their Slack first thing in the morning at 9 o'clock, right? Or do they kind of filter in, that sort of thing? Is there an expectation of pairing, or do you work individually and come together every so often? Hopefully the teams actually have captured some of these things and put them into a document, right? One of the best things that can happen when you first kick off a new project is to establish a set of norms. How are we going to work together? What are the boundaries of our relationship here? What's okay to talk about, and what's maybe not okay to talk about? What is the sense of how quickly people respond to the various messages, email and Slack and DMs and that sort of thing. So what are the set of norms? If you're joining a team that's already been established, you'll have to figure these out as you go. Hopefully there's a document that you can look to, but it's always good the first couple days, weeks, to kind of see where things fall, and then just sort of adapt to those. You don't want to challenge the norms and say, hey, I've got a better idea, let's do all this, and shake everything up right away until you've really kind of assimilated into that culture. So those are norms. And if you're in a position to create a norms document, suggest, hey, let's take the next retro and build out this norms worksheet and really kind of establish what our plan here is. Now, you might also be faced with perhaps a new task, right? Here's a new feature we want you to implement. There's 15 different screens and 15 different parts of the code that you have to connect to, and we want you to add a little button to the screen that does this. And you're thinking, well, I don't know where to start. I don't know how to look at this, but I don't want to look like I don't know what I'm doing. How do I ask for help, right? So it's a perfectly normal feeling that when you ask for help, you're opening yourself up, you're revealing that there's something that you couldn't do, something that you couldn't figure out, right? This is like a visceral, deep down part of being human, right? Like it's vulnerable to ask or to say that you don't know how to do something. Now we try to through the apprenticeship at Eighth Light try to kind of beat that out of people, right? We say ask questions, ask all the time. It's not a problem. It's not a bother. Like ask, right? But when you're joining a new team, you're not quite sure what the norm is there. And so what we tend to recommend is find somebody that you can go to, right? Find somebody who's sort of like an ally for you and can help you through different things, right? Maybe it's like a pairing partner, or maybe it's the team lead, or maybe it's somebody you know, that you can trust, confide in, and go that way, right? Hopefully you're part of a team where it's perfectly normal and everyone says, yeah, ask all the questions you want. We have no problem stopping what we're doing and helping you. But try to find an ally, try to find somebody that that can help you out, right? And if something is very obviously wrong, right? Like there's a good chance that you may uncover a bug or a requirements deficit, right? Like we don't quite know what this requirement is, and you need to ask more information. And it'll be great that you spoke up and that sort of thing, right? Now, there's a couple ideas here about what constitutes a good question, right? Who is the audience, right? Are you talking to the right people who can actually answer this question? You know, make sure that you've got the right group for your question. What are the details, right? If you did uncover a bug, have you sort of exhausted all of the different paths before you give up and say, I don't know what's going on here? Especially if you know, it is something that is part of an existing system, right? So that you can go to somebody and say, I've tried this, this, and this, and I don't, I still can't get it to work. I think there's a bug here, right? Now, the next point is timing, right? How long should you struggle, right? If you're assigned a story and it's supposed to take 2 days to finish, and you spend a whole day just sort of spinning and not getting anywhere, and then the next day they're like, "Oh, you should be wrapping that up today. What's the status?" You're like, "Well, I haven't even got started." That's going to look like you spent too much time before asking for help, right? So figure out what the time frame is, and if it's something that you know you're going to need help on right away, don't delay, but also exhaust all the possibilities before you do. There's also sort of when is it appropriate to ask a question, right? Sometimes you know, not all questions should be asked in front of all the stakeholders or the business team, or you know, maybe the CEO is visiting town, and so perhaps find the right time to ask the question. And what is the body language and the phrasing, right? So you don't want to ask a question of like a very accusatory, right? Like, why did you do it this way and not this way, right? And maybe it's more about, could you help me understand your thought process here about, you know, when you built this tool and what this code is trying to do. So we definitely encourage everyone to ask for help and to not get stuck and to ask lots of questions. But there's sort of an appropriate way to do it and to think about those before you dig in. I brought up earlier about finding an ally, and what does it mean to be an ally on the team, right? What we tend to think about in the context of communication is, are you advocating for others? Are you amplifying their voices? Are you creating opportunities for others? Do you create a comfortable and safe environment? Do you make everyone feel welcome? Do you advocate for someone's presence in a meeting, right? Like sometimes meetings will get scheduled and you'll notice that somebody wasn't on the invite. And do you make sure that they get invited because they have a lot of good knowledge and context and they should be part of the meeting? Do you speak up to defend folks, especially around, decisions were made or why things perhaps didn't finish on time or something like that, right? And do you recognize some of the inequalities that exist and some of the biases? And so what we typically say from day one is, even though you might not be the most experienced and you're brand new to the team, you can still be an ally, right? Like you can still recognize effort, right? Give a shout out at the end of a sprint and say, hey, this person did a great job, or they really helped me when I was stuck, and I want to recognize that. Using inclusive language, right? Do you say, hey guys all the time when perhaps the team is not all guys, right? Do you support groups and make sure that everyone is heard in the meeting? And so one example here is, rather than saying, what this person is trying to say is, and kind of paraphrasing it for them, you can simply say, hey, I saw you were trying to say something. Would you mind, repeating that and telling the whole group, right? Like giving them the floor and letting them kind of elaborate on their idea. And be a role model, right? Speak up. We had an example here of in our London office, someone joined a team and it was a very, let's call it like a bro frat culture, right? And women and underrepresented groups didn't feel entirely safe. And, you could recognize that and help break down some of those barriers and help the team be a really safe place, right? And so it's just a matter of kind of being aware of some of these dynamics, thinking about how the team interacts, and using your voice to help move that forward. So that's building trust. We'll next look at reviewing code and giving feedback. So every team reviews code a little bit differently, right? They have their own pull request norms. They have their own ways of giving feedback within the code. And it's definitely something to look for when you first join, right? Is there a style guide? Is there a wiki, or does the README have information about what it's appropriate when you're giving code feedback, right? And so take a look at that. See if you can find some of those documents and ask around, especially when it's if it's like your first code review, or you're not quite sure what to do. So here's some ideas about different types of code review process. So there's a synchronous code review, right, where you and the author go through the pull request together, right? In person, you're looking at it. They have a chance to explain what they were thinking and why they made the choices, and you can give feedback right away. Now the downsides here is you have to both block off time together, and if you're not capturing notes and comments, they might get lost. So this is great if it can be done. Sometimes we do like a mobbing code review where the whole team takes a look at a piece of, especially if it's a really big pull request, and take a look at it that way. The other probably more common is an asynchronous code review. Somebody puts up a PR and they say, okay, everyone take a look and get your feedback. Now, the trick here is you can have a slow feedback loop, and a PR can be open for much longer. Not everybody takes a look, or you get into that sort of groupthink mentality of, oh, someone else is going to review it, so I don't need to review it, and it just sits there for a little bit. So again, it's important to figure out what the norms are, how long should pull requests be open, and what's the expectation there, right? And that's what I've found in a lot of the teams I've been on is that's a good retro question of, hey, PRs aren't being reviewed fast enough. Let's try to get them through. A little bit of etiquette here that we tend to look at, right? So thinking about nitpicks, and this can be tricky, right? Because a nitpick could be as simple as, you know, like a code style, like you didn't indent, or you used 4 spaces instead of 2 spaces, or things like that, right? But if there is a code style guide and a person is not following the style guide, then that's probably not a nitpick, and it's the team has decided, hey, we've all agreed that this is how the code should look, and I'm just gonna, you know, mention that here while I'm reviewing it. Don't review the author, right? Like this should not be a time to attack the person that wrote the code. It's more about the code itself, right? And again, like avoid absolutes, right? Like it's an absolute not to check in a sensitive API key. It's not necessarily an absolute to say, well, you should have used a while loop here instead of a for loop, something like that, right? So I guess the big takeaway here is when you're reviewing code, that is a chance to communicate with the team. It's a chance to improve the product, and there's you know, there's definitely better ways to do that than others. And this kind of brings us to the next thing of suggesting a new feature, right? We've all kind of been at a point where like, oh, it would be really great if you know, we could do this feature, especially when you're in the middle of the code and you see something that's could be refactored, and there's a good opportunity. Think about how that looks, especially if you're brand new to the team, of, you know, you're coming in, you're looking at the code, and you're all of a sudden suggesting a whole bunch of changes and a whole bunch of new ideas. And so we recommend taking a step back and making sure that, like, do you really understand the way things are done and why they're done that way, right? Like oftentimes, you know, and this is the key part of, you know, the prime directive of a retro is we, you know, we all agree that we made the best decision that we could at the time that we made it with the information that we had, right? And so give people the benefit of the doubt of this is the way it is for a reason, and there are probably many, many reasons that got up to this point. And so really trying to fully understand why things are done before you suggest changing them, right? Also, have you built up the trust, right? Do you have the trust of the team? Does the team see you as their ally, and they're more receptive to listening to you, right? is it better to wait a little bit? Is this feature really useful, or does it just make the code that you're writing a little bit easier? Those sorts of things. And then how would you present the idea to the group, right? Is there an opportune time to bring it up and say, hey, I've been thinking about this. What do you all think about this idea, right? So just some things to think about. We definitely recommend, we do a very like user-centered design and development. And so we definitely take the user into consideration, and we try to do what's best for them. And always there's going to be a new feature to or a better way of doing something. It's just a matter of finding the right way to present it. There's also a norm around communicating back to the team about your progress, right? So oftentimes you just have a touch point at the beginning of the day, or whenever your stand-up is. You have a team sync, everybody gives their update from the day before and what they're working on today, and then you kind of all disappear, right? Either you go in pair, or you kind of go off on your own. But what's the expectations about sharing what you've done back to the team, right? Who needs to know? Is there like a general Slack channel that you can post progress that you've made? Is there a specific person that's waiting on you to finish something, and you want to make sure that they know where you're at, because maybe they've shared timelines with the business team, or what does the progress look like? Who's waiting on your information? How much detail to share, right? If you're sharing with another developer, it's probably appropriate to like dig into the intricacies of the code and why it was difficult to refactor something, and there's a bunch of dependencies. The business team probably doesn't need to know all of that, right? They just need to know, it's going to take an extra day than we thought it was, right? And that sort of thing. So these are all good questions to think about as you're, getting into a team, starting to pick up stories, and making sure that you're building trust, right? Because these all help people trust you, right? If at the end of the day you write a summary of everything that you did and what you found, people are going to look at that and they're going to say, "Oh wow, that's really great. They, took time to give us an update on where they're at, and it doesn't look like they're stuck or anything, and everything's kind of moving forward." And that feels really good as a teammate. At some point, you'll probably want to give feedback to somebody, right? You've come across something, you've been working together for a little while, and there's something that they can do better. They can be, they can be better communicators, or they can be better teammates, or they can be better pairs, and you want to find a way to share that with them. Now there's some channels are appropriate and some channels aren't appropriate, and it kind of depends on the team and what the norms are. But thinking through some of these, right? Sometimes in Slack, is it a public message or a private message, right? You don't want to call anyone out publicly, especially in like a channel that's written down and persistent and they're going to see it forever. Can you DM them and say, hey, I've got some feedback for you. And always you want to ask them, are you open to receiving feedback, right? Some people don't want that they don't want to put themselves out there. They're not ready for that. They'll get their feedback during a performance review, but they're not quite ready for continuous feedback every time something comes up. So ask them and see what they're like. So you've got Slack, you've got email. Sometimes you use those to get to an in-person call, like, you know, hey, I've got some ideas about the last time we paired. Do you have 15 minutes to chat with me about, you know, what I noticed? You know, figure out those sorts of things. And then, and we use Lattice, but there also is like most people have like a performance management tool, or you just do performance reviews every 6 months or every year, and that's your opportunity to provide feedback for your teammates. And so, what does that tool look like, and what's appropriate? One of the frameworks that we recommend is what's called the SBI framework. And so, describe the situation. What's the situation? And, you know, be as specific as possible. What was the behavior that you noticed during that situation? And you don't want to make any assumptions. You don't assume what the other person was thinking or anything. You just describe the behavior as you saw it. And then the impact, right? What impact did this behavior have on us or the team, right? So the situation could be, you know, Kevin on the team was, he would only give us an update at stand-up, right? And we didn't hear from him the rest of the day, right? So that's the situation is communication. It's around, you know, getting information about someone who's working on a story. Behavior is they only talk to us once a day. We don't hear from them the rest of the time. And the impact is we're left feeling that we didn't know what to expect, right? We didn't know whether they were on time with their story or they were behind, or, you know, and if this happens a couple times, the impact is going to be, you know, we were scrambling to get a build ready for the demo, and it was always at the last minute because the you know, the code wasn't in and reviewed. So keep it to the facts, and really explain the impact as it had on your team, and, you know, that gives them actionable feedback that they can then improve on. Okay, I need to communicate more often, more than just at stand-up, that sort of thing. Communication tools. So what are some of the things that you can use to help you communicate better? There are lots of different things out there, right? We know about face-to-face. We haven't experienced that probably for 4 or 5 months, but it has occurred in the past. We've been mostly using video calls, audio calls lately, email, Slack, or some other, you know, Teams collaboration tool, and your storyboard, right? How do you keep track of your tickets and your points and that sort of thing, right? And each of these modes is going to be useful for a different type of communication. Now, I'm the type of person that uses my email as my to-do list, right? So anything that comes in my inbox is either acted upon and archived, or it sits there until it's done, and then it's gone, right? And so I've built up a habit of this like zero inbox type philosophy. What's in my inbox are things that need to be done. If it's not in there, that means I've finished it and I can basically forget about it, right? And that just keeps me up to date on top of things. Now, what's interesting about Slack is you can't really treat it like that, right? Because if someone DMs you and you read the message and you don't do anything about it and you leave, you've now lost that notification, right? It's no longer a little red dot or a 1 or whatever. And so what do you do then if it's something that you have to follow up on, right? Do you rely on your memory to say, oh yeah, this person contacted me, a couple hours ago and I was supposed to get back to them? Or do you transfer it to like a to-do list or some other system? Do you send yourself an email, right, of what to do? So it's worth thinking about and how you're going to be intentional about that. With a storyboard, is it appropriate to leave comments on a ticket? Is like if you have conversations about a story or you're clarifying details, is all that information captured in the notes? Do you use like Jira or Confluence or some way to make sure that everyone is aware of it? Do you have to broadcast an update that says, hey, we had a small meeting about this feature, we decided to go in a different direction, here's the new understanding, and make sure everyone's on the same page about it, right? So thinking about how you capture the information, make sure we know who's gonna carry it on, who's gonna do the work, and everyone that needs to know about it is updated, knows about it. Now, one piece we haven't talked about here is calendars, right? How do you use your calendar to communicate? Now, what's interesting about calendars is there's a difference between, and you might have heard like the maker versus the planner or the manager, right? The maker, the developer, the crafter, the creative person probably doesn't have a calendar that looks like this. They have a very open calendar, right? They have their stand-up or sync meeting, and then perhaps like an IPM or something else. Whereas the manager has a calendar that looks like this, and they're in back-to-back meetings all day long, right? And so it's worth noting the difference and understanding how the calendar can be used, right? So oftentimes in an organization, you have shared calendars where everyone can see your calendar, everyone can look at it, they can create meeting invites, and they can take up time, right? And so a manager is going to look at your calendar and they're going to see, oh, you're wide open, and I can meet with you. I've got an opening at 2 o'clock, so I'm going to put something on your calendar and we'll have a meeting about this feature. And as a developer, you're thinking 2 o'clock, that's right in the middle of my day. Like I can't get anything done. I'm going to go to lunch and I'm going to come back and I'm only going to have an hour, so I can't dig into this this feature, so it's not even worth starting it. So maybe I'll just kind of read the news or do some things before my 2 o'clock meeting, and then I'll work after that. But now you've just completely derailed your entire day. So it's worth noting the difference between that and using your calendar to your advantage, right? Can you block off a chunk of time from 1 to 5 every day that says, development time, story time, don't book a meeting, I'm not available. Or perhaps you work better in the morning, and so it's an 8 to noon type block. If somebody does invite you to a meeting, can you say, hey, can we schedule this at the end of the day or the beginning of the day or before lunch or after lunch, so that it's not breaking up my creative time to work on feature work, right? And make sure that you're using your calendar to communicate. I need blocks of time to get my work done. Who should schedule events, right? Typically we say, if it's your meeting and you want to get information, you're the one that schedules it, right? So you make the invite, you add all the people, and you put an agenda, right? It's important to have an agenda. Why is this meeting happening? Especially if you're meeting with managers of the business, like they're going back to back from one meeting to the next. They're going to accept your meeting because they know, oh yeah, we need to talk about this. But 5 minutes before, they're going to look at their calendar and say, oh, what's that meeting about? I forgot. So it's important to have an agenda in there of, what's important, what are we trying to accomplish with this meeting, and that way everyone can come prepared. It's also good to think about if you're taking time off, how do you tell your team? What's the what's the norms, what's the, you know, how far in advance, those sorts of things. What do I need to finish before I can, you know, leave for the day to make sure that I'm not going to be interrupted when I'm on vacation. And then a little bit more about tickets. What's important to go into a ticket, how much detail to capture, who writes the tickets. I tend to think that the developers should have a hand in writing the tickets, right? If the project manager is the one writing all the tickets, then the developers are going to get there and look at it and be like, oh, I don't understand, and you're going to go back and forth. So it's at least useful to have some collaboration when the tickets are being done, documented as much as possible, you know, that sort of thing. And the last points here about releases and what's the process and making sure everyone's on the same page, and, you know, how far in advance do we need to start the release, because, you know, it takes a couple hours, and if we've got a demo, we want to make sure that it's going to be done on time, that sort of thing. So there you have it. That's the information I had for today. Like I said, these were foundational skills, and this presentation was put together with a lot of rhetorical questions, right? It's designed for you to kind of think inward about how you approach this topic, right? How do you set yourself up and create some good habits so that it becomes something you don't really have to think about, right? Like you've set up your email and Slack configuration, you have your calendar, you know, you're getting the right notifications about when to go to meetings. You're building that listening technique of listening to learn, and you go into meetings ready. You've figured out a way to take notes and pay attention and focus on the important things, right? And so if you can do all of these, you're naturally going to build trust with your teammates. You're naturally going to be seen as somebody who is attentive and responsible, and you're going to become a go-to person on your team, right? And part of that is because not everybody does this, right? Not everybody takes the time and is intentional about how they're showing up and how they're communicating to their colleagues. And so even just doing these things will make you stand out, right? You will become somebody who is sought after, whose advice is important to the project. And hopefully you build a good foundation and you leverage them to the next level, right? The next level of being persuasive and negotiating, and really kind of having a point of view and an opinion and sharing that effectively with others. So thank you very much. I have some time if anyone has any questions. Feel free to throw them into the chat or unmute and we can have a conversation. But thank you all for listening today.